Hi everybody, welcome to Unit 5. This is the overview for the unit. I'll talk a little bit about the assignments and then share some information to kind of help you move through the unit with the big ideas that I want you to be sure to focus on. So we're talking about adapting the environment and focusing on the decisions that you make and how you can impact the environment and promote student learning. So we'll be looking at these questions. How does a teacher determine when and if students are ready to move to the next level with their learning? In what ways can a teacher increase the challenge when students are ready? And what are instructional activities that can draw on students' interest? And I'm confident that if you watch or read all of the things in this unit, you'll be able to answer these questions effectively. So here's what you're going to be working on. Reading chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9 focuses on differentiation for readiness, which I'll talk about in just a couple minutes, and Chapter 10 focuses on differentiation for interest, both important things to consider. View the videos and look at the website to go with this unit. You'll see those in the module for Unit 5. Also complete the seesaw activity, the cultural event, reflection, and the quiz. And don't forget, for the cultural event, be sure that you get your event approved before you attend it. Be sure, if you haven't found an event yet, you want to be sure that going to the event will help you as a teacher learn how to differentiate for your students. That's the goal of the assignment. So be sure that the event is going to teach you something that will help you to be able to do that. And it helps when you send me the email to get your event approved if you explain a little bit about how the event is going to do that. And then the quiz on November 5th. Okay, so here we go. One of the key ideas that I want to stress in this unit, it's not one that's going to come up in what you're reading and what you're viewing, but it is going to come up in what I want to share with you, is that by law, as educators, we do have a responsibility to differentiate for students in the classroom. And for those students who have an identified disability, we are required to make those adaptations that are in their individualized education plan, their IEP. So by law, we're required to do that. It's good practice for all students, but it is the law for students who have an identified disability. So hopefully in some of your other classes, you've heard of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which spells out really the 6 things by law that educators and education, the system, schools, and districts are required to do to meet the needs of students with an identified disability. And it's important that parents also know about these requirements so that they can be advocates for their child. So I'll share the 6, but we're only really focusing on 1 in this class. So children who have identified disabilities have a right to a free, appropriate public education, an appropriate evaluation, an individualized education plan or an IEP. They have a right to be educated in the least restrictive environment, and that often, in fact, mostly happens in the regular classroom. That's why this is so important if you're going to be a classroom teacher, to keep in mind that students who have an individualized education plan are most likely going to be in your classroom all day or part of the day. Parents also have a right to participate in the process of developing that plan and updating the plan. And there are some procedural safeguards such as timeframes that have to be met, the people that have to attend the meeting to create the plan. Those are part of those procedural safeguards. So we're going to focus on, and we already have been, focusing on the kinds of ways that you can adapt educational opportunities in your classroom to meet the individual education plan of students who have an identified disability. And so it's really about, IDEA is really about tailoring your teaching to meet the various strengths and needs of individual students, all students, not just those who receive special education services, but all students. But it is the law that we do meet especially those needs of students that have been identified. Now, with the IDEA, there are certain responsibilities that the school has, which I just mentioned. They have to do with identifying the learning needs of students, administering the assessments, providing results in a timely manner, holding a meeting with parents and educators to determine the best place, the least restrictive environment for that student, creating an IEP or individual education plan, reviewing that plan yearly, and communicating with families. So schools are required to do those things, and you will definitely be a part of those activities. Families and students also have rights, and they have the right to receive all of those things that are the school's responsibility, all 6 of those things. So it's important that we are working to make sure that we are meeting those needs of the families and the students. When a student is ready to move beyond their IEP, beyond their plan, and sometimes that is to a more restrictive environment, but not very often, and we hope that's not the case. But if they're moving to a lesser restrictive environment, and then that's the time when you may even have more opportunities to work with a child with identified special needs. So let's say there's a child who is in a full day special education setting. Very few students are in that kind of a setting, but there are students who still are. And it's been determined that that student is ready to begin transitioning into the regular classroom. So you would step in as a regular classroom teacher, and that student would come to your classroom maybe at first just for an hour or two, maybe for a half day, and you would be expected to differentiate your instruction to meet that student's needs during the time that that student is in your classroom. So you have to be familiar with the plan and what is required to be done in the classroom to accommodate that student based on their plan, and then know ways that you can differentiate with your teaching to meet the needs of that student as the student transitions into a least restrictive setting. It is 100% certainty that you will have students who have an individual education plan with an identified special education need in your classroom. 100%, absolutely. No question, no matter where you teach, rural, urban, small school, large school, city, town, wherever it is, you absolutely will have students in your classroom. And so it's your responsibility and requirement by the law that you meet the needs of those students. And that's one of the purposes of this class, so that you are building up lots of tools in your teacher toolbox so that you'll know how to meet the needs of those students. And when we talk about differentiating, those are where those tools come from. We're going to focus on some more of those tools in this unit. We're actually going to be looking at ways to differentiate your teaching for students who are ready to learn a certain skill based on their own experiences, based on their understanding of the topic. We're going to talk about ways to differentiate for students based on their interest. What do they want to learn? What sparks their curiosity? What catches their attention? And ways to differentiate based on students' learning profile, which their learning profile has to do with the ways that they work and learn more effectively. So it could be something physical, such as the way the room is organized, the light, the airflow in the room, but it also could have to do with the student's learning style, their gender, their culture, their physical, emotional, and social needs. All of those fall into the learning profile. That encompasses a lot. That's in our next unit, in Unit 6. You'll read about that in Chapter 11. So in this unit, we're just focusing on differentiating for readiness. What's a child ready to learn based on their experiences and their knowledge already? And what kinds of things are children interested in learning, and how can we capitalize that and make learning more relatable, more connected to students. So when we're thinking about this differentiation, we're really trying to help students move from learning something in a concrete way to a semi-concrete to a more abstract. And I would say this is the million-dollar question for teachers. How do you know when and how to guide students from concrete to abstract? That's the challenge. It has a lot to do with your observations, your assessments of the students, what you know about their backgrounds, all those things come into play to help you figure out when this child is ready to move to that next level. So let me give you an example of what I mean by concrete, semi-concrete, and abstract. So I'm going to start with one that comes from my own daughter. When she was learning to swim, she was 5, and I took her to swimming lessons at a public swimming pool here in Topeka. And she had this great teacher who actually ended up coming to Emporia State being one of my students. But she had this great teacher. And one of the first things she did was take Emily, lay her on her back in the swimming pool, the teacher put both of her hands under Emily's back, and she kind of motored her around the swimming pool. She actually made motorboat noises as she did that. 2 hands under Emily, kind of just gently gliding her on top of the water around the swimming pool. Very concrete. Both of her hands were there to catch Emily. Emily really was just kind of experiencing what it was like to move around in the water. Now, semi-concrete. The next year, when we went back for swimming lessons, Andrea, the teacher, this time the first day to kind of check out what level Emily was at, she put Emily on her back and she gave Emily her 2 pointer fingers to hold on to, and Andrea pulled Emily around the swimming pool, but Emily was only holding on to 2 fingers. That concrete hands under her back, that was gone. She just had a little thing to grab onto as she was floating around the pool. And Andrea started talking to her about how to move her feet and what to do if water got in her face. So she was getting her ready for the next level of learning. And that next level happened the next summer when Emily was able to back float on her own. She didn't need the hands underneath her. She didn't need the fingers pulling her around. She didn't even need the coaching. She could do it on her own. So she moved from that concrete to the abstract. Now, what does this look like in the classroom? Let's say you're helping students with measurement. Let's say you're in a 2nd grade classroom and you're helping them learn to use a meter stick. So concrete is you give everybody a meter stick, or you have kids work in pairs, and you have them measure their desk or a table or some objects in the classroom and write down the measurement. So that it's concrete. They have the stick, they have the object, they do the measurement. Now, semi-concrete, instead of having them measure an object, you're going to give them a paper with a shape on it, a square or a rectangle. And they're going to measure that shape. So they don't have the real object to hold on to now when they're measuring. They just have the line. Less concrete. Even less concrete than that, more abstract, is to give students a word problem. Let's say the problem is about a baseball team and they're at the baseball diamond and their coach has to put the chalk lines down, and you have to know what the measurements are to make those chalk lines. Now students have to picture that baseball field in their head. They don't have the stick to use. They don't have the paper to measure. They have to picture those measurements in their head, and that's the most abstract when they have nothing to hold on to. So the trick is, the art of teaching is figuring out how to move from that concrete to that abstract, and sometimes you'll have kids stuck at one of those levels. They may not get to the abstract yet when they're with you. Remember the power of yet. They may not get to it yet when they're with you. Your goal is to move them across that continuum so they're closer to that abstract. Now, here are some examples of scaffolds that will help students move from that concrete or that more dependent learning to a more independent learning. And so we start with skill building, very dependent. Excuse me, skill building entails you as a teacher teaching students the skills, giving them small tasks to try out, and saying, okay, you're going to do this now. Then we can move to structured independence, a little less dependent, but still relying on the teacher. So the teacher is saying, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? So let's use a real classroom example. Let's say you're working with students and you have literacy stations in the classroom. And so you say to the student, do you want to do this phonics station today, or do you want to do this spelling station today? So there's just that little element of choice. That's the structured independence. You're providing the options. The student makes that choice between the two. Now, a little more independence is shared independence, where you're saying to the student, do you want to do this, or do you want to do your own choice? So let's say you're teaching reading and you're having a silent reading time in your classroom and you're offering students the option. Do you want to read from this collection of science books that I have over on the reading table, or do you want to have free choice and choose your own book? So you're still providing some structure, but you're also giving students the option to choose their own, make their own choice. And then self-guided is when you're offering students the option to do what they want to do. Now, this doesn't mean they can do whatever they want to do within some structure. So when students go to the library to choose their own book, that's self-guided, unless you as a teacher are standing there kind of encouraging students to check out from a certain area, maybe the librarian is, but for the most part, that can be a self-guided type of independent activity where students are choosing their own book that they want to read. And that's what we would hope a library time would be. So offering more choice, but within some kind of structure, helps students become more independent. And that's an important part of differentiating. Now, one of the things we're working toward, and you'll read about this in chapter 9, you'll read about self-efficacy. And that is the feeling, the good feeling that we get inside of ourselves when we have learned something. And I know in our last unit on our quiz, several of you shared your productive struggle that you went through. And part of a productive struggle, for it to be productive, you have to get to the end and you have to feel good about what you've learned. And that's building your self-efficacy. When you feel good about what you've learned, when you feel like you've accomplished something, when you feel like you've worked hard and you've made it and you've figured that out, that good feeling is often what triggers you to want to keep learning. So students who don't get that good feeling, they often get the feeling that they want to give up, or they don't want to keep learning, or they want to drop out of a class, or they want to drop out of high school. So self-efficacy, that feeling, that good feeling that you get from that sense of accomplishment, it is a critical part of learning. And sometimes as teachers, I think we're too eager to jump in and do it for kids when they struggle. We see, oh, this student is having trouble with this project or with this problem or figuring out this word when they're reading. And we're quick to jump in and help them because we think that's what a teacher is supposed to do. But really, a teacher is supposed to give students the tools they need to solve that problem themselves, to figure out that challenging word themselves, to figure out how to do that story problem themselves so they can get that self-efficacy. And when we do it for them, we rob them of their opportunity to build self-efficacy. Now, that isn't to say you never help kids. I mean, you're going to, definitely. There is a fine line between developing self-efficacy and getting so frustrated that you want to give up. And as a teacher, you have to understand where that line is, and it's going to be different for each of your students. So it's really kind of holding back at first and giving kids a chance to work through a genuine challenge, to stretch a little bit beyond their comfort zone. And that's one thing I try to do in this class, to encourage you to use technology in a lot of different ways to get out of your comfort zone. So I know sometimes that's frustrating. It doesn't work like you want it to work, but when you get it figured out, it also feels awesome. And so it's trying to find the balance between those two things where you can feel like, hey, I can do this. I figured this out. Yes, I needed some help, but I figured this out and now I can do it again myself. That's the power of teaching and learning, when you can guide your students to feel that more than frustrated. Okay, in chapter 10, you're going to be reading about differentiating. Oh, Excuse me, just one second. Here we go. Differentiating for interest. How do you capture students' interest to make them want to come along in the lesson, make them want to learn what you're teaching them? And some ways to do that, one way is to hook the students, to grab their attention, to get them interested. Chapter 10 presents a lot of different ways to grab students' attention and to hook them. And I hope that you will read through the descriptions of the classrooms and teachers, because they're talking about ways that they grab students' attention and hook them. And that is key. If you start your lesson and it's boring at the beginning, you've lost a significant number of your students. But if you start your lesson by showing some real objects, wearing a funny hat, playing fun music in the background, showing an interesting video, displaying a website that has some catchy graphics on it, sharing a personal story of your own, teaching a game that students can play, starting off with a sack with objects in it that students have to guess what they are, having students talk to each other, reading a book. All of those are ways that you can grab students' attention. I'm getting ready to teach a lesson to 2 8th grade boys for a project that I'm doing. And my lesson is about inquiry, or asking questions and researching information. And they both like Kit Kat candy bars. And so my lesson is going to start with showing them 2 candy bars. Food is a great hook. And then I'm going to show them a video about how Kit Kat candy bars are made. That right there, I'm hoping, we'll see, will capture their attention. And that's what you need to be doing when you're working with students, having a way to capture their attention at the beginning. Now, another important part of differentiating by interest is giving students opportunities to wonder and discover about things they are interested in themselves, asking their own questions, exploring the world around them, and books and resources to try to answer those questions. We'll call this inquiry. Some people call it blended learning. Some people call it project-based learning, but that's a great way to capitalize on the genuine interests of students and get them to want to keep learning because they are asking their own questions, and that can drive their learning. So hopefully you get some good stuff from Unit 5. Take care.